theyeshiva.net.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Denburg. Shavua Tov, and a good tevach to everybody. You know that I was thinking of throughout the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, it ever says that something is good and also sweet together. And there's one verse in Tehillim, you remember? Hine, matov, o manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. How good and how sweet, pleasant, when brothers sit together. And then I realized it's a novel statement, because usually in life, things that are good are not necessarily sweet. Things that are sweet are not necessarily good. For example, kale. My wife says it's very, very good. Cucumber juice, celery juice. You do celery juice? It's very good, sweet, but then there's cheesecake. It's sweet, but good. It's the angel of death incarnate. Potato chips, sprinkle cake, 7-layer cake, whatever, all the foods that some of you had this morning. Sweet, but not good. How many things in life are good and sweet? So King David says, one of them is when brothers and sisters sit together. When family sits together, it's good, but it's also geschmack. It's sweet. It's pleasant. It's delightful. Matov umanayim shevet achim gam yachad. It was his way of saying that when Jews get along, it's not just good. It's also sweet. It's pleasant. When you see a family where siblings get along, parents get along with children, there's real trust, attachment, connection. It's good, but it's also sweet. It's delicious. To be able to see here the unity of different communities of Boca coming together is good, but it's also noyim. It's sweet. It's pleasant. It's delicious. I have the privilege of traveling to Jewish communities around the world. It's not always the case. 3 Jews, 19 opinions. I once heard from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory. He was having a public debate with Amos Oz. I don't know if you know Amos Oz, quintessential Israeli left-wing thinker and writer. So before the debate started, Amos Oz says, Rabbi Sachs, I have to confess, I will probably disagree with everything you say tonight. That's only a Jewish debater. Like, how do you know? It's not even a question. Before you said it already, I know that I'm going to disagree with you. However, Rabbi Sachs, I have to tell you, I will also disagree probably with everything I say tonight. I once heard from the Rebbe, from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, why is it that when 2 Jews meet, one says Shalom Aleichem, and the other one says Aleichem Shalom? Why don't you reciprocate in kind? Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Aleichem. Imagine in English, I say good evening, and you say evening good. How are you? You are how? What's up? Up what's? Strange. But in Hebrew, we do it all the time. Shalom Aleichem. No, Aleichem Shalom. Just say Shalom Aleichem. So the Rebbe said, because when 2 Jews meet, even before they begin a conversation, the first thing is they have to argue with each other. The first thing. There was a famous Kabbalist, you heard of him, his name was Jackie Mason. He used to repeat my jokes a lot. So he once said, when 2 Jews meet, if within 3 minutes they don't establish a familial connection, one of them is not Jewish. I see it all the time. I would say if 2 Jews meet within a few minutes, they don't get into an argument, one of them probably needs to convert. So before we begin a conversation, it's Shalom Aleichem. No, Aleichem Shalom. Once we establish we're both Jewish, we have a disagreement, now hopefully we can engage in meaningful dialogue. Then I understood. The Torah says in the beginning of Beshalach, we read it this morning, Vayikach Moshe es atzmos Yosef imoy. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him when they left Egypt. Imo with him, the Talmud says, Imo b'mechitzasei, for 40 years, he kept the bones of Joseph right near him. For 40 years, Moses, he was 80 years old. Till 120, he carried the coffin of Joseph with him. Why? Joseph had children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, 2 tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh. Couldn't Moses ask one of the descendants of Joseph, here, take your Zayda's coffin. It's a big honor. The leader himself, who carried the whole people with him, why did he have to carry for the next 40 years? Take it, retrieve it himself, and hold on to it. The answer, my dear friends, is simple and profound. Moses knew that it's hard for Jews to get along. It's hard. Contention comes very natural to the Jewish people. Shalom aleichem, aleichem shalom. He also knew that if the new, fresh nation cannot trust each other and love each other and support each other, there's no way they're going to survive. Especially when you have sharks waiting to jump on you every moment. Amalek and Canaanites and all the enemies the Jews would encounter, Moses understood, if we're not here for each other, there's no way this people is going to survive. And yet, there was so much discord and fighting. So what did Moshe do? He kept right near him the remains of Joseph. And he showed the people constantly, remember this boy. It was because of his brothers' loathing of him and mistrust of him that they were capable of selling him into slavery. Remember how you all became slaves in the first place in Egypt. You ended up there because you sold your brother. This was a sobering reminder to the Jewish people that we don't have to agree with each other, heaven forbid. That would not be a Jewish thing to ask. But we have to be able to support each other. It's like in a good marriage, in a Jewish marriage, to ask a Jewish wife to agree with her husband would be ludicrous, probably unethical too, especially married to your husband, whatever, that was just a joke. We don't have to agree with each other, but we have to learn how to argue with respect. I have to know that you have my back 1,000%. You have to know that I got your back 1,000%. We disagree, like in the Talmud, they always disagree, but with trust, with affection, with empathy, with attachment, with connection. That's why Moses had those remains. And in today's world, where Jews are surrounded by sharks, and I heard that the Goyim Defense League moved from California to Boca Raton. So thank God the Goyim now have a defense league against the Jewish people. When you have sharks ready to pounce on you every moment, as Winston Churchill said, appeasement is feeding the crocodile with the hope that you will be eaten last. And the Sfas Emes said, we say in the Haggadah, Shaloi echad bilvad amad aleinu l'chaloseinu. B'chol dor v'dor. Literally, it's not one foe who tried to kill us, it's in every generation. And he said, Shaloi echad bilvad amad aleinu l'chaloseinu. The real threat that threatened our extermination is one thing, Loi echad, that we were not echad, that we were not united, that we were not interconnected, interlaced. This was what Moses was reminding the Jewish people. If you ever go to the West Coast, near San Francisco, you have the sequoias, the redwood trees. Some of them are 4,000 years old, 3,500 years old. They're older than Moses. They go back to the time of Joseph. They go back to the time of Noach, of Beshalach. It's incredible. And scientists wanted to understand what allows a tree to weather thousands of years of storms, of California forest fires, of bacteria, of viruses, of infections, of germs, of tsunamis. What allows trees to have such longevity? They imagine that the roots must penetrate 100 or 200 feet deep in the earth so that nothing could destroy these trees. How astounded they were a number of years ago when they developed the technology to be able to examine what is happening on the subterranean level to see that the roots of sequoias are very shallow, 4 or 5 feet deep. How then do they survive and weather all the storms? And they realize what the trees lack in depth, they make up in breadth. What happens with the sequoia trees is as follows. the roots begin spreading in width. And when the roots of a sequoia meet and encounter the roots of another sequoia, you know what they do? They interlock with each other. And they continue looking for other sequoias. So you can have 50 or 100 sequoia trees. On the surface, above the earth, there are distinct trees with different personalities, shapes, designs, and genetic makeups. On a subterranean level, all these trees are literally interlocked, interconnected, integrated, interlaced with each other. A storm could destroy one tree, not 100 trees that have become one. And when I was reading about that research, I'm like, wow. What the sequoias are in the world of botany, the Jewish people are in the world of humanity. We are the sequoias of history. We are the redwoods of history. And the question is, how did it happen? Was it our depth? Sometimes, but the real answer is, Shaloi echad bilvad. It was the bones of Joseph that Moses carried with him and told the Jewish people, on the surface, you can all be different. Shalom aleichem, aleichem shalom. Distinct personalities, distinct flavors, different affiliations, persuasions, and of course opinions and ideologies. But on a subterranean level, when you get to the core, make sure you remain interlocked with each other, interconnected with each other, integrated with each other, because then nothing and nobody can destroy the sequoias. Until today, it is so true. Jews disagree. That's not a problem. The problem is the toxicity, the poison, the negative energy, the hatred. Literally like in a marriage, if I can't trust you, if I feel that the reason you disagree with me is simply to stab me in the back or in the chest, that's what destroys marriages. When a husband and a wife can talk about their different perspectives, beautiful, it expands horizons. That's a good thing. And it was certainly one of the hallmarks of the leadership of the Lubavitcher Rebbe being commemorated tonight in tribute of the yartzeit of his father-in-law, the day he assumed the leadership of Chabad 73 years ago, on the 10th day of Shevat, 1951, to teach the Jewish people, we don't have to agree, but we need to love each other. Reb Zalman Boca's brother, I once met him at a chuppah. I was at a chuppah in Brooklyn, and we were standing outside. The chuppah was taking very, very long. So we were schmoozing till the groom and bride came out. And he shared with me, and he said, it was very, very special. He lives in Chicago. And he shared with me that it was once before Yom Kippur. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe had a custom that on the day before Yom Kippur, Erev Yom Kippur in the afternoon, he would distribute honey cake, lekach, to whoever wanted to receive honey cake and a blessing. And if you know the geography of Brooklyn a little bit, the line would extend down Eastern Parkway and go up Brooklyn Avenue till Union or President. It was a very long line, but it was very fast. It took, a half a second for each person to get a piece of cake, get a blessing, Shana Tova Metuka, and move on. This was the year of 1979, Tafshin Mem. So Rabbi Bucket's brother, Reb Zalman's brother, told me that he was online. It was a long line, but it was going very fast. And in front of him was a Satmar Chassid. Satmar Chassidim, they're centered in Williamsburg, and they had some profound disagreements with Chabad about how to deal with secular Jews, how to deal with Israel, how to deal with secular Jews. Some serious disagreements that sometimes turned out not so aesthetically geschmack. It wasn't so tov and noyim. It was like potato chips and black and whites. In front of the Satmar, this was a Rosh Yeshiva, he was the head of a yeshiva, and in front of him, there was a Jew who was a secular Jew. He was like a hippie, he had long hair. And the Satmar Chassid saw that this man is going for honey cake. And the reason he came was the Satmar Rebbe, Zeichet Tzadik Levrocha, Rebbe Rayatz, passed away summer 79. So this man wanted a blessing for the new year, so he decided to cast his lot with the Lubavitcher Rebbe and get a piece of honey cake. He came from Williamsburg to Crown Heights, he got online, but in front of him was this really looked second. And he could see that this man was not pleased with his neighbor. He really was not pleased. What really shocked him was when they came to the Rebbe gave this secular Jew a piece of cake and a beautiful blessing. And then the Rebbe asked him, I said there was Erev Yom Kippur, I'm sorry. This was Hoshayna Rabbi. He would give a second time honey cake in the middle of Sukkot, the last day before the Simchas Torah. So he asked this fellow, he said, where are you going to dance for the Hakafas on Simchat Torah? Where are you going to dance? Now, obviously, he wasn't planning to go anywhere to dance, but he was nice. So he said, I'll see. You know, when people say, I'll see, it usually means, my people will call your people. So the Rebbe says to him, it would be an honor and a privilege if you would come dance with me here in the shul for the Hakafas. I would really appreciate it. So the man says, I'll think about it. You know what that means, right? I'll think about it. Now this man behind him, who was a Hasidic Satmar Jew, is like, really? The Lubavitcher Rebbe, all he could think about is that he has to dance with a Jew who has long hair, who's completely alienated from Jews. It's going to be a privilege for you to dance with him in the shul? Fact. This is what he was thinking. Now comes his turn. The Rebbe gives him honey cake and tells him, Shana Toivom Sukkah. He's about to leave and he says, are you a Satmar Chassid? Are you the follower of the Satmar Hasidic tradition? He says, yeah. He says, you learn Yismach Moshe? Yismach Moshe in the world of Satmar is one of the classics. It's a commentary on the Chumash by the founder of Satmar Hasidus. His name was Rabbi Moshe Teitelbaum, the rabbi of Uhel in Hungary. If you heard of Uhel, Hungary is called the Yismach Moshe. In Satmar, Yismach Moshe is like Tanya in Chabad, like Reb Chaim in Brisk. It's a classic. So he says, do you learn Yismach Moshe? He says, of course. He says, do you remember the story that he tells in his commentary on Tehillim? He asks this man. He says, a little bit. So the Rebbe reminds him the story. And the story is that one of the great Hasidic masters, his name was Reb Michal of Zlochev, when his father passed away, his name was Reb Yitzchak Dobrishe, he came up and Rashi, the great biblical commentator, came to greet his soul. So he says, what gives me the privilege? And Rashi says, your son's life causes so much joy to God. What is unique about your son? So he says, my son fasts from Friday till Friday. He only eats at night and on Shabbos. He's a worked out person. Rashi says that's pretty impressive, but there's other people who do that. I see that he causes unique delight to God. So he tells Rashi, my son collects money to distribute for charity to poor people, orphans, widows. Rashi says that's amazing. There's nothing like the mitzvah of charity, but there are other Jews who do it. What is unique about your son? He says, my son uses every spare moment to learn Torah. Rashi says, listen, that's awesome. But there's other Jews who are so diligent in the study of Torah. There's something about your child, your son, who creates such a commotion in heaven that is unparalleled. So he tells Rashi, V'rabim heishiv me'avoin. My son brings Jewish people closer to their Father in heaven. He embraces Jews who feel alienated, and he shows them that their space at the table of Jewish history and as an indispensable part of the golden chain of Jewish history is forever present. That's what my son does. And this is, remember, this is in the 18th century. Rashi says, that's what it is. Rashi calmed down. Rashi said, now I understand why God is overwhelmed with joy by your son. And the Rebbe looked at this man and he said, if Rashi calmed down, you can also calm down. Rabbi Boca told this to me. He said he was shocked. Because the man didn't say a word. The Rebbe felt his thoughts. And then as he was going away, the Rebbe says in Yiddish, Hast verstanden? You understand? He said, Ich habe gut verstanden. I understand well. Now you have to know how Hakafas worked in Lubavitch. Hakafas would start Simchas Torah 1 o'clock in the morning. Most communities, Hakafas starts 7 o'clock. There's a Kiddush. By 8 o'clock, you're done dancing. And if you have a real Yeker Shul, it's usually 7:45 is already pushing it. And if you have a really lively shul, you may go till 8, you may go to 9. If there's good, healthy kugel and kishka and blanks, schmanks, whatever it is, another half an hour. In Chabad by the Rebbe, he would do a fabrengen before Hakafas. He would come down 9 o'clock at night and speak for a few hours. And because it was such a festive time, the Rebbe's creative energy would come out in a unique way. Brilliant insights for a few hours, till 12. Then they would take a break, and 1 o'clock in the morning, he would come down to dance for Hakafas. And the Hakafas could go for a few hours. And then he went back to his room, but people stayed and danced. So if you went into 770, still today, 5, 6, 7, 8 in the morning, people are still dancing from the night before. So Rabbi Boca tells me the night of Simchas Torah he was dancing, and 6 o'clock he decided it's time to go to sleep, because tomorrow morning is going to be Shabbos, and the Rebbe came down again to daven and dance again. So he was going out from the back door to go to sleep 6 or 6:30 in the morning. And who does he see dancing? He sees an old Russian Jew with a casquette dancing, together with whom? With that young man with the long hair. The one the Rebbe invited to come, and he said, I'll think about it. He was engulfed in an ecstatic dance with an old Russian Jew who spent years, Usher's son, who spent years in the Gulag. And somehow their souls connected 6 o'clock in the morning, dancing with closed eyes in ecstasy. He says, it seems like after all, he couldn't refuse the invitation. Some invitations are hard to refuse. It's one story, but it captures a sentiment that is so essential for our conversation today. That ability to be able to convey to every one of our brothers and sisters that you are an indispensable note in God's cosmic symphony. To never ever give up on a soul. And by the way, it's sometimes easier with strangers than it is with your own children. We live today in a time where many children are choosing different paths than their parents taught them. And it's so hard. Because if it would be your neighbor's child, I promise you, he would come to your house Friday night, you would give him a big kiss, and you would call his mother Saturday night and said, well, your son is so cute. But when it's your own child, they're not cute. When it's your own child, they're causing you sleepless nights. You're trying to find the right therapist, psychiatrist, guru, coach, and healer. But this message is very, very profound. The first person you never, ever disconnect from is your own. Ever. You come from a place of deep, deep belief and connection, but without ego. It's hard sometimes with family. But what the Rebbe was teaching this person is that the greatest thing we can do is to have our doors open and our hearts open. When there is pain, we tend to shut our hearts. And we shut our hearts to the people we love most. There was a philosopher, he once wrote, people end up hating those they love most. Because if I wouldn't love you so much, you wouldn't mean anything so much. I remember when I was a yeshiva student, I was probably 17 years old. The Rebbe instituted a daily class in Rambam. And over 1 or 3 years, you cover the whole Mishnah Torah of the Rambam. It's a fantastic curriculum. And it's not well known because Maimonides was probably the most organized thinker in Jewish history. The most organized, this is before Google, before anyone. Maimonides organized all of Jewish law in 14 books. This is in the 12th century. And it's the greatest magnum opus that is comprehensive on all of Jewish law. So the Rebbe felt strongly that learning it would give people a mastery of Judaism that they will not get through Talmud. Unless they really learn through the Talmud and they know it backwards and forwards, which very few people can do because it's so complex. The Rambam is organized and brief. So he instituted this curriculum in Maimonides, Rambam. You finish either in 1 year if you do 3 chapters a day, or in 3 years if you do 1 chapter a day. So I remember it was one night, they were learning Rambam, Hilchis, Chametz, and Matzah. The laws of Chametz and Matzah. And it was the yartzeit of the Rambam too, which is the 20th day of Tevis. And I remember the Rebbe gave a talk, a shiur, like a lecture, discussing a law in the Rambam that was studied that day. The law, I knew, it's a technical law in Mishnah. It's one of those very technical laws that don't seem inspiring. It's like one of those tedious laws that you learn about if you had a yeshiva education, a good one. You learned it. It's in Mishnayos, it's in Shulchan Aruch. Even the topic is not inspiring. It's talking about Jews who fall asleep in the middle of the Seder. Now, that is a sacred Jewish tradition, right? Especially if you're lucky enough to be at a Seder of people who love hearing themselves and love focusing on every chapter of the Haggadah. You know those families, right? There's a guy, I know a guy, I saw him in Beagle in a bookstore, 40 Haggadahs. He ordered 40 Haggadahs. I'm like, what in the world? He says, I have to prepare. I'm like, thank God I'm not coming to your Seder. But some people love to lecture, so at some point everybody schluffs. Everybody schluffs. I go around the crowd, so rabbis always ask me, Rabbi Jacobson, what's the most important ingredient in a shul? And I always say comfortable chairs. The rabbi says, why? I say, listen, they don't sleep all week. They come to your sermon, they want a good schluff, yeah? Give them comfortable chairs, I'm a chaya. At least that, why not? Why not? There was once a rabbi in South Africa, so he told me that Friday night he would give a sermon, and there was a guy in the front seat. His name is Berkowitz, and every week he would snore. The rabbi would start, and Berkowitz would snore. Every week. 20 years the guy was sleeping. Literally, it was like his thing. But he paid his dues, so the rabbi couldn't say anything. He paid full. How many people pay full membership, and he didn't negotiate? And that was his right, so he couldn't say anything. The rabbis are laughing. I don't know why, but whatever. So, one week, the rabbi was coming up to the pulpit, and Berkowitz already was snoring. The rabbi lost it. He says, Berkowitz, I didn't even start yet. Berkowitz looked up and he says, Rabbi, I trust you. So there's this Jews trust their rabbis. There's this fascinating law, but very technical. And the law is as follows. If Jews are sitting around a Seder table and eating the afikoman, you all know the afikoman is that piece of matzah that you hid, your kids stole, they found it, they exposed it. That's what kids do. They expose everything their parents hide. And then they want a prize. And you're all sitting around and eating that matzah. It's getting close to the end of the Seder, everybody's exhausted. And you fall asleep. You fall asleep. Now you wake up, you want to continue eating the matzah. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to. You know why? Because the Torah says that the Passover offering, you had to eat in one place, not in two places. And if you sleep in middle, it's like you changed locations, not physically, but mentally. Because when you wake up, it's like a new meal. You're a new person. You went to sleep. It's not a continuum of the first meal. You got to stop eating. Very interesting law. The afikoman, we eat commemoration of the Passover offering. Same law. You fall asleep in middle, you're done. Even if you just started, you wake up, you can't continue eating. This is all if you did a Seder alone, a Corona Seder. Or everybody around the table fell asleep. But what if there's more than one person around the table? It's a group. Even if everybody fell asleep, but one person or a few people stayed up, so now when you wake up, you could continue eating the afikoman. Why? Because since some of the people didn't fall asleep, they held the chairs warm and inviting. So now when you wake up, you're rejoining the meal that was not interrupted. At least one person didn't sleep. This is a law in Mishnah Pesachim, page 120, in Rambam Chametz Matzah, chapter 7, in Shulchan Aruch, Code of Law, Laws of Pesach. The Rebbe decided to speak about this law. When the Rebbe would speak about a law in Judaism, it came to life and it started to dance on the pages. Because he would explore the mystical, psychological, emotional, spiritual, personal, practical relevance in people's internal lives. The Rebbe said he's going to talk about this law, and I was thinking to myself, I was 17 years old, maybe I shouldn't say this, I'll confess. What are you going to do with this law? Come on. How exciting is this law going to get about Jews who are schluffing because they're tired and exhausted? They're not in a hotel. They worked hard for Pesach. Bad idea. They worked hard to prepare for Pesach. And they're sleeping. And then the Rebbe explained the meaning, the inner meaning of this law. It taught me two things. First of all, it taught me about Jewish history, how Jewish history works. Second thing it taught me is how you have to study Jewish law and how you have to teach Jewish law. Halach. And his message very briefly was this. He said, this law is not just about people sleeping physically at the Seder. That too. It's a law that represents the narrative of the Jewish people. Because the Seder essentially is our story. It's a long story. From the Exodus of Egypt till Mashiach, we're on a journey. And the journey has matzah and maror. There's bitter herbs, and there's meat, and there's matzah, and there's wine, and there's difficult moments, and exhilarating moments, and tragic moments. And we are at a table telling the story of Exodus, telling the story of our journey from exile to redemption. But he said, unfortunately, so many of our brothers and sisters at some point in history fell asleep. And there's a reason we fall asleep. Why do you fall asleep during a rabbi's sermon? Anybody? You're sleeping? There was a rabbi the other day in his shul, and he was talking. The president hated him. So the president would always sleep. So the president fell asleep and he started to snore. So the rabbi tells the gabbai, take a baseball bat and knock him over his head. It was his opportunity for revenge. The gabbai takes a baseball bat, goes to the president, boom. The president looks up, he says, do it again. I could still hear him. I have terrible jokes. People fall asleep when they're bored, when it's irrelevant, when things are monotonous, right? They once asked a Jew, what's the difference between ignorance and apathy? And he said, I don't know and I don't care. The story of the Jewish people got boring for people. And not just boring for some people, it was an invitation for persecution and tragedy and pain. Leave me alone. I had enough of the Seder table. There are other isms. And I'll go explore other isms. And he said, sometimes you look at the Jewish people, the Rebbe said, and you look and it seems like most Jews at the Seder table have closed their eyes and they're schluffing. And their children are schluffing. And he says, sometimes you have a temptation to say, they're not part of this meal anymore. How will the Jewish people merit redemption? You want to give up. You want to feel alienated, or you become judgmental and dismissive. And then he looked at the crowd and he said, remember, who is the one who decides if they're part of the meal or not? It's those who decide if they're going to stay awake or not. As long as you stay awake, all of them are still part of the meal. It's not only when they wake up, even when they're sleeping. If there's one Jew who's awake, it redefines the state of all the Jewish people, because we're all one group sitting at one Seder table, because all the Jewish people are connected. And he said, never in Jewish history did every Jew fall asleep. And because never in Jewish history did every Jew fall asleep, whenever any Jew opens his or her eyes, they continue where they left off without an interruption, because somebody was fully present. Somebody was fully awake. I used to work in transcribing the Rebbe's talks. It was very hard work. And Saturday night, I was up all night, and sometimes Sunday night as well. So I would come out of the building where we worked near the Rebbe's shul at like 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning. And one of the scenes I remember, Eastern Parkway is a very busy street. But between 2 and 4:30 or 5, it's quiet. So you would come down to Eastern Parkway, 2:30, 3 in the morning. It was silent. Even Brooklyn went to sleep. Not just Florida went to sleep. They sometimes go to sleep during the day too. That's why you came here. But migration. But in Brooklyn, 2 to 4:30, they go to sleep. In Brooklyn, I'm talking about. I would come down, and I was walking home, and I would always stop to look at the Rebbe's room, because that's where he was left. His wife passed away. He moved into his office, and he lived there for the last few years. And he was there himself at night in his room. And I would see 2:30 in the morning, his light is on. And then 3 o'clock, the light is on. And 3:30, it may go off for a half an hour or 20 minutes. He would go to sleep, and then it would go back on. And it would go off and on. And I realized he's sleeping a few hours, but even those few hours, it's a half an hour. And then he's up, and then he goes back to sleep and is up. It said about the Vilna Gaon that he used to sleep 2 hours a night at only 30-minute intervals. And then I understood what he was saying, that as long as somebody is up at the Seder table, everybody is part of the story. Everybody is part of the story. And in many ways, that's such a powerful mission statement for each and every one of us. My job is, I can't always wake everybody up, but I could stay awake. I could fully stay awake. And when I stay awake, it already redefines everybody else, because they're all part of it. And when they wake up, and everybody will wake up, Everybody will wake up because every Jew is eternally and essentially connected to the eternity of Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people and the divine. Everybody wakes up. At some point, the sermon ends and people wake up for the Kiddush. And in Jewish history too, when we stop preaching so much and we start dancing and experiencing, everybody will wake up. But those who were always awake, make sure that everyone's story just continues. Maybe you interrupted your story for 100 years, 150 years, but if you go back 5 generations, every Jew had Shabbos and Tefillin and Shabbos candles and Purim and Chanukah and Pesach. We fall asleep. But you're not starting a new meal. You're continuing. That same continuation. That's the power of shared responsibility. I heard from Rabbi Beryl Wine. Rabbi Beryl Wine, as you know, is a great Jewish historian, lives today in Israel. And his father-in-law, his wife, her blessed memory, her father, name was Rebbe Levine. He was a Lithuanian Jew who moved later to Chicago. And he learned by the Chafetz Chaim in Raton in Poland. Chafetz Chaim was the great luminary of Lithuanian Jewry pre the Holocaust. He died in 1933. His name was Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKoyen Kagan. Known as the Chafetz Chaim because of his work. Chafetz Chaim, desiring life. Miya Yisha Chafetz Chaim. And he heard from his father-in-law, he was there. It was Tzom Gedalia, the fast of Gedalia, the day after Rosh Hashanah, a few days before Yom Kippur. And the Chafetz Chaim got up in the yeshiva of Raton. He didn't hold an official position there. He wasn't the dean or the Rosh Hashiva or the mentor, but it was his yeshiva, but there were other people who actually ran the yeshiva and taught. But he got up at the bima, at the pulpit, right after prayers on the fast day, a day after Rosh Hashanah. And he turns to the boys who are studying in yeshiva, older boys, students, maybe 200 boys, 300 boys. And he says, guys, I have a request. 4 miles from here, there is a shtetl, there's a city, and the mikveh that the women were using is broken. And it's not kosher, and it can't be used. And the community is suffering from inertia. They're not fixing it. And it's a crisis. Because women who want to have a mikveh don't have a mikveh. And it's not like today, you get into a car, it's impossible. So they don't have a mikveh. It disrupts family life, etc. And then there are those, there's no mikveh, they don't use a mikveh. So I want to ask if one of the boys could go pray Yom Kippur in that community. Go there 4 miles, pray with them. In the middle of the day, get up and give a sermon about the urgency to repair the mikveh, because Yom Kippur, people's hearts are open. They'll listen to you. If anybody wants to volunteer, Chafetz Chaim was already in his 90s. He was a very old man. It was hard for him to walk. If anybody wants to volunteer, please come over. He finished his speech, and one of the yeshiva boys comes over to him and says, Rebbe, I have a question on a Tosfos. Tosfos is a commentary on Talmud, very complex commentary on Talmud, written in the 12th, 13th, and 14th century in the Ashkenazic countries of France and Germany. In the yeshiva, people toil on a Tosfos for a week, for a month. It's a very difficult commentary for those who study Tosfos. And he says, Rebbe, I have a problem with this Tosfos. So the Chafetz Chaim looks, and for 15 minutes, he explains it to him, and they discuss it back and forth in the yeshiva sing-song. After 15 minutes, he's done. He thanks the Chafetz Chaim. Chafetz Chaim says, young man, did you hear my speech a few minutes ago? He says, yeah. He says, maybe you will volunteer to go to that city for Yom Kippur? He says, no. He says, why not? He says, Rebbe, you want me to take the holiest day of the Jewish year and spend it with a community who doesn't even care about fixing a women's mikveh? Such an apathetic and indifferent community. You want me to spend Yom Kippur there? It's below me. It's not nice. It's not dignified. I don't want to contaminate myself. I'm a yeshiva boy. I want to remain in an environment of holiness. And Rabbi Beryl Wine says he heard from his father-in-law, was right there. The Chafetz Chaim turned around and he spat. 2! And he looked at his boy and he said, Pfui with your Tosfos. Which means your study is a disgrace. your study, pfui, pfui, like, with your Tosfos. The story shocked me. The story shocked me because it's like a quintessential Lubavitch story. But true Jewish leaders understood this. They understood that even religion can become narcissistic. Even the study of Torah can be selfish. Even religion can become holier than thou. I'm holy, you're not holy. We become judgmental, dismissive. I go into my cocoon. And I think it was one of the greatest achievements of the Lubavitcher Rebbe in a post-Holocaust generation to teach every Jew. Open your hearts, open your doors, open your souls. Take responsibility. Don't be indifferent and apathetic. And it begins in your home and your family and your community. And as the Rebbe did, he sent out today what is close to 6,000 emissaries to every corner of the universe to build bridges. Why? And then when I heard that talk, I understood. He sent the emissaries to go to every Jewish community, every Jewish oasis, every Jewish home, essentially, and just tell everybody, we're awake. We are awake at your table. And whenever you're ready to join, you'll go back to your Seder. It's not our Seder. It's your Seder. We're awake. Ani yeshena, v'libi. My father once shared with me that he asked the Rebbe, why is it that he undertook dealing and talking about a very controversial issue in Israel, which, to put it mildly, cost him lots of friends and supporters? What do you need it for? So the Rebbe looked at my father and he said this. The first Jewish leader's name was Moshe, Moses. And the first story about him is he went out to his brothers and he saw an Egyptian beating a Jew. And it says, Vayifen koi v'koi. Vayarki einish. He turned here, he turned there. He saw there was nobody present. And he struck the Egyptian dead and he buried him in the sand. What does it mean he saw there was nobody present? There were people present. How do we know? There were two informers who informed upon him to Egypt, to Pharaoh. That's why he had to flee. If there was nobody there, Pharaoh would have not discovered what happened. There was somebody there. Why does the Torah say he saw there was nobody there? If anything, it should have said he thought there was nobody there. But there were two people, Jews, who informed. Rashi asks this question. That's how I know it's a good question. And he gives an answer. The Rebbe told my father, he said, I'll give you another answer. And this is what he said. He said, Vayifen kai v'kai, Moshe saw an Egyptian beating a Jew to death. He turned here and he turned there, Vayar, and he saw, Ki ein ish. There is no man, not that there's nobody seeing what's happening. Ki ein ish. There's no man to stand up to the crime, to stand up to the injustice, to dip his finger in water and do something. Ki ein ish. There's nobody here. There's nobody present. There may be physically 1,000 people. There may be video crews. There may be WhatsApp statuses. Everybody may be taking videos with their phones and passing it on, and people sighing and kretching and even sending $18 checks. But ki ein ish. There's nobody to take responsibility. There's no person who will stand up and say, Atkan, that's it, Daloi. Jewish blood is not hefker. Jewish blood is not worthless. And Moses had to make a fateful decision at that moment. Do I say, nobody cares, why should I be the only Michiganer? I'll also write a check for $36 and write to my family's WhatsApp how anti-Semitic this newspaper is or this organization is. Moses said, you know what? If nobody cares, then I have to care. And he killed the murderer and he saved the Jew. And that's how he became Moses. Now, my father was very impressed that the Rebbe would say this in response to a question about himself. The Rebbe didn't like talking about himself. And within moments, the Rebbe tells my father, and that's what my father-in-law was like. He right away deflected it. He says, that's what my shver, my father-in-law, the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, that's what he was like. But this is so relevant today. How many of us know or see or hear of things that we know are not just less than perfect, but sometimes really, really ugly things? But we hide the matzah. Remember, whatever we hide, our children are going to expose. Whatever we hide. Moses teaches you a different model. Vayar ki einish. Take responsibility. Be a woman. Be a man. Take initiative. You might say, who am I? I'm insignificant. I'm valueless. In the real world of Judaism, in the world of the Chafetz Chaim, and in the world of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, that equation was simply not true. Or as Samuel told King Saul, Im kotoin ata beinecha, haloi roish la'alfa Yisrael, ata in your eyes you may be small, but you're a leader of the Jewish people. And in the Rebbe's eyes, when he saw people, he did not see smallness. He did not see insignificance. He did not see valuelessness. He did not. I had the merit and the privilege of growing up at the feet of the Lubavitcher Rebbe for many, many years. I was born in Lefferts General Hospital, which is in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn. So I was actually born in Crown Heights and bred there. So every Shabbos, sometimes every day, I would see the Rebbe and hear him for many years. And very often, Shabbos, holiday, I go back in my imagination, standing in 770 Eastern Parkway, and watching this great saintly sage sitting and speaking for hours. And I have to say, when the Rebbe spoke, it didn't have the regular entertainment of a professional orator. He didn't tell stories. He didn't tell jokes. He didn't take off his glasses and put on his glasses. He didn't wave with his hands. He didn't scream. He didn't know. Once in a while he did, but it was simply from passion. It wasn't orchestrated. When I heard the Rebbe speak for years, two things struck me so deeply, and I could still feel that vibration in my psyche. Number one, the Rebbe could not tolerate when people saw themselves as crippled, small, valueless, and insignificant. He simply did not buy the story. He just didn't buy into it. People would always say, I'm a loser. I'm a victim. I have trauma. My parents had emotional constipation. I grew up in the house of survivors. I grew up in the house of Russian survivors. I got no money. I got no mazel, right? I remember I once met a Jew by me in Shul, a tzaddik, a saint. He was a convert. He was so inspiring. He taught all the FFBs, the Fablunjets from birth, how to daven. He was a convert, so he like Yisro, like Jethro. He once came to me, he's such a humble, sweet man. He says, Rabbi Jacobson, I have the worst of both worlds. I say, you're a source of inspiration. He says, no. Ich habe a goyische Kopf mit Yiddische Mazel. In Yiddish. I still remember, I gave him a kiss. I still remember walking on Eastern Parkway and seeing, this is before email, before fax machines. Now you have to understand, the Rebbe was born in 1902. He passed away in 1994. 1902, a few months before the Wright brothers gave us the gift of flying, of airplane. Literally born a few months before. The Rebbe passed away in 1994. That's the year when the World Wide Web exploded and we got the gift of internet. So in 1902, right after his birth, the plane was invented, which allowed the world to become a smaller place. In 1994, the world was given the internet, which caused the world to become literally a bedroom. It used to be, I wrote a letter to my cousin in Australia or Jerusalem. If I got an answer in 5 or 6 months, I was thrilled. You remember? You remember in camp when you got a letter from your mother? You remember? You opened the envelope, you read it, you put it back in the envelope, and you read it for the next 6 weeks or 6 years, and you took it out and you read it. Then came the fax machine. You remember the fax machine, Olav Shalom? You sent a fax, and instead of waiting 6 months to get a letter from Brazil or Melbourne, by the next day, you got an answer on the fax machine. Incredible, amazing. Then came internet, email. And I send an email, and I don't have to wait the next day. When you go and sit down by your email, maybe in 4 hours, I expected to get a response to my email. Wow. From 6 months, we went down to a day, we went down to 6 hours. And then came Rabbi Shalom's alienated in WhatsApp. And now I expect the answer before even I send. As I'm pressing send, and you already see it. You're not answering me. Why aren't you answering me? You're upset? Let's go to therapy. What's happening? Are there issues? What are you repressing? Let's talk about it. I know I deal with this type of issue all the time. Why aren't you answering? What happened? You ignore everybody like this? Then I realized you have to get rid of that blue check that shows them that you looked at it. But I'm not such a maybe. One of my kids explained to me. The airplane and the internet, like everything in God's world, it can be used in one way or in another way. But it seems to me that those years, the Rebbe's leadership, what he tried to teach is the oneness of the world, Einoid Malvadai, the oneness of the Jewish people, our ability to recreate a world that is amazing, but one thing he could not understand or tolerate was when people had an internal narrative of I am simply insignificant. And not with judgment. He didn't do it with judgment. But somehow in the Rebbe's presence, he could lift up a mirror to you by letting himself become a mirror to show you who you are. In many ways, I would say, he became a Rebbe in 1950. It was 5 years after Auschwitz. The Jewish people were not recovering yet. We lost 6 million. We were engulfed, not in a shiva, but in an eternal story of grief and pain. Jews in Israel, Jews in America, Jews the world over, so much brokenness, so much pain, so much grief, it couldn't even be spoken about. I remember when Elie Wiesel told me, he said, in those years you were embarrassed to be a Holocaust survivor. People in America wouldn't believe you, they thought you're cuckoo. I don't know if you know about that chapter. Adolf Eichmann's trial changed a lot of that. Almost people didn't want to tell their story, like, there was such a sense of brokenness. And it was one of the most powerful contributions of the Rebbe, not to ignore what happened, but not to allow the Jewish people to define themselves by Hitler's hate, rather than by God's love. Not to define ourselves by the fact that somebody wanted to destroy us, even though it's so true, but to define ourselves by a mission that the Jewish people was sent into the world to bring redemption to the world by revealing the infinity in each and every one of us and in everyone we come in contact to. So he saw people, and you understand the depth of inferiority complex when everyone tells you you're hated. It touches us in such a deep way, unconsciously. So the Rebbe taught his students, and he said, when you see a Jew, the first and most important thing is, look at this person and see him, see her, so they'll be able to see themselves. Believe in them so they'll be able to believe in themselves. But really believe in them. But in order to do that with others, you have to be able to do it with yourself. This was fascinating to me, how the Rebbe really did not acknowledge the victim story of people, not because it wasn't true, but because he could see infinity within the soul. So yes, you may have been through hell. You may have endured terrible, terrible pain. You may be confused and overwhelmed. You may find yourself engulfed in darkness and confusion. You may be dealing with circumstances beyond your control. And that's all real, and that's authentic. And I have to be able to have compassion for that and not minimize it. And yet, when he saw a person, what struck me was that the Rebbe really saw that line of his ancestor, of his grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, the Balatanya, who says every Jewish soul is a chelek Eloka, mimal mamash, is a piece of God, is a fragment of infinity, is a derivative of the consciousness of Ein Sof. So now he would ask, can God be destroyed? Can God be snuffed out? If you are truly a derivative of the infinite consciousness of God, can you tell me that trauma or brokenness or difficult stories in life, internal or external, even mental challenges, or other psychological, emotional, spiritual, financial challenges, physical challenges, they're real and they're painful. And everyone needs to find the means to be able to confront and deal. But can you tell me that at your core, you're destroyed? If you are a piece of Hashem himself, so at your core, you're indestructible. You're filled with optimism and happiness and confidence and creativity and curiosity and compassion and caring. You're filled with possibility. You're whole. You're not broken at your core. When you look in the mirror, can you truly see that even my anxiety and even my depression and even my challenges are ultimately opportunities in his world to be able to bring infinity into the darkest places and transform darkness into light? As a youngster growing up, and I saw a lot of trauma growing up, it wasn't always easy for me to hear this from the Rebbe. I sometimes felt he was too optimistic. Like, why don't you get a little cynical? A bunch of bums, a bunch of sharks. Get cynical. Maybe it was one of his achievements. I don't know, historic. He was a genius. And he was so not naive. Like, he knew everything. He knew all the corruption. He knew all the politics in the Jewish world better than everybody else. He himself was a victim of so much of the divisiveness and stupidity, of jealousy and pettiness and fighting, etc., if you know the history a little bit. I remember when the mailman would come and deliver the mail every day. Before fax machines, as I said. 4 or 3 sacks of mail, and each one a few hundred letters. And they would be delivered into 770 and all brought into the Rebbe's room, or most of it. 600 or 700 letters a day. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Shabbos too. And I heard from his secretary, Rabbi Label Grona, that the Rebbe did not allow him or anybody else to open the envelopes because they were private. So the Rebbe opened up every letter himself for decades. He opened up every envelope himself and read it. You're talking about hundreds of letters a day. Once, he had a follower, a chassid, a Chabad chassid. His name is Chanan, Rabbi Chanan, Zalman Chanan. He lives on Montgomery Street. And he decided to buy the Rebbe a Sony electric envelope opener. Do you know those openers? Try opening 600 letters a day. Look what happens to your poor finger. You put in the envelope in the opener, Amachaya. The Rebbe returned it. He said it's making too much noise. So he called up the company and he asked if he can get a silent model. They said it's out of stock. But somehow for the right amount of money, they found one that was available. He was so excited. And he gave in the silent envelope opener to the Lubavitcher Rebbe to open his envelopes. And the Rebbe returned it. This was a little disheartening for him, and I guess the Rebbe felt he had to explain. And he explained. He told his secretary, Rabbi Klein, to share with him, and he said as follows: different people seal their envelopes in different ways. Some people seal their envelopes with scotch tape, with saliva, with glue, with a stapler. But there are some people who they seal their envelopes with their tears. Wie kann ich öffnen mit der Maschine, was ein Jid hat vermacht mit den Tränen? How can I open with a machine that which a Jew sealed with his or her tears? The electric Sony machine won't detect the tears. When my finger opens the envelope, I can touch the tears. Because the key of healing is always attachment, connection, empathy. Hold my tears. Don't put a machine to take my tears. Hold my tears. It's not easy. So when you see so much pain, when you see so many tears, it's so easy to shut down. It's easy to give up on people. It's easy to give up on God. How many Jews in our generation gave up on God? It's easy to give up on the world. Because pain causes us to shut down. It's too painful. People are sensitive. And if you're sensitive, we know we shut down. This is where I felt was one of the great teachings that the Rebbe taught me. And that is, he never shut down. He was ready to contain the tear. But then he said, stay with the tears. Stay with the people. Stay with the people. Stay with the nation. Stay with your heart. And if you stay, you'll discover something else. You'll discover that beneath the pain and beneath the brokenness, you will find right there, you will find an invincible radiance from with which we can recreate ourselves individually and collectively. And if you see it, catch onto it, hold on to it, and model it for people. And don't become discouraged by externalities. Remain decisive and committed. Because when you believe in people, they could truly believe in themselves. More important or equally important, believing in God for the Rebbe meant believing that God believes in you. It's easy to say, God is great, God is infinite. Big deal. If he's God, he's probably infinite. What do I know? It's a little harder to say. If God is great and God is infinite, he made no junk. If you're carved in his image, you're part of that infinity. You're an ambassador of God in this world, an ambassador of love and light and hope and healing and redemptive consciousness. And that changes everything. That combination of reality, not naivete. There's an innocence that comes from naivete, and there's an innocence that comes from the ability to embrace everything. One of the profoundest teachings of the Baal Shem Tov that I have encountered is one line. The Baal Shem Tov says, Moses speaks to the Jewish people in this week's portion, Beshalach, and what does he say? Ki kasher isem es Mitzrayim hayoim, lo yisaysifu leroisam, ois leroisam ad oilam. As you see Egypt today, you will never see them again. You're not going back to Egypt. Don't worry. It's over. The relationship is over. You're gone. Says the Baal Shem Tov. Why the clumsy introduction? Just tell the Jews, you're not going to see Egypt again. We're not going back. He doesn't say that. He says, as you see Egypt today, you won't see them again. And the Baal Shem Tov says something, and this is 1700s, 200 years before Sigmund Freud, or his real name was Schleimele Freud. He doesn't like that, but that's the truth. Became the father of psychoanalysis. And the Baal Shem Tov says, Moshe was telling them, because you're ready to see Egypt today, you won't have to go back there again. That part of Egypt that you're ready to see today, you won't see again. The parts of Egypt that you're not ready to see today, you will see again and again and again. It's because you're ready to look at Egypt today that you won't have to revisit it again. And what the Baal Shem Tov was telling people is, don't be scared of any one of your parts. Don't be scared to look. Don't be scared to feel. Trust yourself. Trust your kids. Trust people. Everyone knows exactly what they need to heal. Their soul and body have the wisdom. The body keeps the score, and the soul knows the score. But it's my doubt and ambivalence that creates so much confusion. So the Baal Shem Tov says, don't be scared. Moshe says, whatever you see today, you will not have to see again. But if you're not ready to look at it, if you're too embarrassed, if you're too ashamed, if you feel too much guilt, if you have to repress, you will see it again and again. It's going to leak out from every leak in your system, passive, aggressive, unconscious, subconscious, repression, suppression. It's going to come out in your daughter-in-law's relationship with you and in your relationship with yourself and with your mother, with your sister, with your brother, with your sister, and even with your rabbi and rebbetzin. You're ready to look at Egypt today. You won't have to look at it again. If you could look at it, if you could see it, if you could notice it, if you can observe it with compassion, with tenderness, with love, understanding that this is part of my story. I'm not scared of it because the eye is infinite and it was sent into the darkness to transform it, not to become a victim of this type of experience, of this type of darkness. I once heard from Elie Wiesel. He would come Simchas Torah a lot to the Rebbe. And once he drank l'chaim and he had a nice amount. And the Rebbe said, you deserve a blessing. What do you want? And he said something so vulnerable. He said, teach me how to cry. Teach me how to cry. And I'm sure many of you understand what that means, but I'll explain for those who don't. When people go through certain experiences, they don't cry, not because they don't have a reason to cry, but because if they would have cried, they would have not stopped. There used to be, I don't know if you know, there's prayer books I saw in Machzorim that used to say in certain places, Kan Tzarech Livkos. Here you have to cry. And I once asked Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, what a joke. Imagine I tell you guys, okay, now it's time to laugh. Now it's time to cry. Rabbi Adin said, you're an American brat, so you don't understand. Those Jews could cry 24/7, but they were told, you got to live. But at some point they said, open the faucet, and they started to cry. It was fine. But when the pain is so deep, we become disembodied. It's too much. We shut down. What looks like indifference is really profound pain. Sometimes you have a spouse, and they don't feel. And you think they have Asperger's, they have autism, they're selfish. They have so much trauma that they had to disembody from their emotions at the age of 4. They stopped feeling. They stopped feeling. It takes a lot of courage to feel. A lot of courage. To feel means you feel pain, and then you could feel love. So those Sidurim, they said, here you could cry. So Elie Wiesel tells the Rebbe, teach me how to cry. The Rebbe used to cry a lot. The Rebbe would cry a lot, especially in the earlier years, but even in the later years, he cried. He used to cry. He cried freely. I remember one Simchas Torah in 1986, he cried like a baby for half an hour. He was 87 years old. He cried. So Elie Wiesel said, teach me how to cry. The Rebbe looked at him and said, I don't want to teach you only how to cry. I want to teach you how to laugh. I want to teach you how to dance. But the two are really connected because I can't shut off the water source in my house and expect one faucet to work. Either the water is on or the water is off. If the water is on, I feel pain and I feel love. If the water is off, I don't feel pain, but I don't feel love either. To feel your mother's love to you, you have to be able to feel the pain she caused. And to feel the love to your children, you have to feel all the pain too. We don't want that. So we shut down. So the Rebbe said, I want you to feel, to be able to cry, but I want you to be able to laugh. I want you to be able to dance. In our generation, after that darkness, to be able to give that to people was a tribute to the fact that the Rebbe remained one of those individuals who refused to fall asleep at the long Seder table. And even after Hitler, it seemed snuffed out. the joy and the creativity of the Jewish experience. The Rebbe said, he will not define our story. Moshe will define our story. The Rambam will define our story. Avram Avinu will define our story. Hashem will define our story. The Baal Shem Tov will define our story. Truth will define our story. Love will define our story. Openness, creativity, empowerment, unity, that will define our story. And a revolution began in the form of the Rebbe's leadership, or as I heard from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, he said, in my mind, the Rebbe was one of the smiles that God gave the Jewish people after Auschwitz. The concealment of Auschwitz was so horrific. Afterwards, God smiled to the Jewish people. Rabbi Sachs said one smile was Israel. That was one smile. And another smile was the Rebbe's presence, the Rebbe's leadership. It was a form of revelation in the soul of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who taught a Jewish world to smile, and to smile to each other, and to smile to our youth, and to smile to people we agree, and to smile to people we disagree. I spent Shabbos at Chabad of East Boca, a whole Shabbos. I didn't stop talking. The rabbi left in the right time. Rabbi Nu left in the right time. I know we're in Chabad of Central Boca. It's Chabad of West Boca. We have the Boca Raton Synagogue. We have the Boca Jewish Center. And what I see in all these communities is the ability of people to smile, and to smile to people that you don't agree with. To create communities of love and warmth and connection. To smile to each other. To embrace each other. To hold on to each other. And to be able to rebuild a world that's saturated with confidence and with decisiveness and with a vision of Netzach Yisrael, of the eternity of the Jewish people. That when God gave us the Torah at Sinai and He put us on the voyage from Exodus to Sinai to redemption, that story has not been interrupted because Klal Yisrael did not fall asleep. And even if there are those who close their eyes for a few minutes, and we can't blame them because God's sermons get very long. I don't want to say tedious, but sometimes tragic. Sometimes they're hard to hear. The core, the nucleus of the Jewish people is awake, is vibrant, is alive, is well, is confident. And therefore, as one Jew at a time opens eyes and looks around, our job is to have our arms and hearts open, because it's your story, it's your soul, it's your future, it's your beauty, it's your infinity, it's your destiny. A few weeks ago I was in Israel, and I visited a moshav, and I had some iced coffee and pizza there. That's why I look so slim. And the woman who hosted me in this moshav, in this little town, shared with me. She grew up in California, in a completely secular Jewish home, a child of the 60s, and then a teenager of the 60s, and then a young adult of the 60s. And like so many, she decided to explore spirituality. But of course, what does Judaism have with spirituality? Judaism is Hanukkah coloring books. So she went on a trip to Europe and Asia and the Far East to find oneness, to find nirvana, one and all in one, to find the cessation and dissolution of ego, to melt away in cosmic oneness. She spent years in monasteries and ashrams, years in meditation, transcendental meditation and karma. She spent time with worms. She spent time with plants. She spent time burning incense and engaging in most of the rituals and many of the rituals of Christianity and of the Far Eastern spiritual disciplines, what we would call classic pagan avodah zarah, idolatry from ancient times. And she took it very seriously. And in India, in an ashram, she got a call that her father was deathly ill. So she took the next flight back to California, and Passover was coming. And a friend said, maybe you want to come for Pesach to Crown Heights, to Brooklyn. There's a very interesting breed, endangered species called Hasidim. And she came. This is 1973. And she told me she saw the Rebbe, she met the Rebbe. He visited a public Seder that they had for the women in an institution called Mechon Chana. And she was very taken by the whole experience and the learning, and she decided to study Judaism for a few months, the first time in her life. And she was enraptured by the depth and the wisdom. She didn't know that Jews believe you have a soul. Jews believe in afterlife. Jews believe in spiritual depth. Jews believe in oneness. She didn't know any of this. At some point, she decided she wants to become more involved in Jewish life. And she felt she wants to write a letter and share her life story with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And she wrote up an 8-page letter in which she outlined everything that she has done over the last few years, including every monastery, church, ashram that she visited, all the rituals, all the rites, all the idols, all the paganism, everything. She wrote to the Rebbe. She was told and she thought that the Rebbe would give her what's called a tikkun. A tikkun means a path to repair her soul, and she was thought that he would basically give her a list of fasting for the next 45 years. She would fast Sunday and then Tuesday and then Wednesday from 1 to 6 and then Thursday from this to this and give charity and run here and daven here and go to the Kaisel for 40 years and then go fast for another 40 years, whatever. That's what she thought. I asked her, no. She said the Rebbe read her 8-page letter and then he answered her. And this was the answer. She shared this with me. Listen to an answer. He wrote, the Talmud says in Tractate Megillah, page 6, Yagaita umatzasa tamin. If somebody says, I searched, and I found, believe them. They worked hard, they found. You work hard, you found. He said, since it's obvious that you have fulfilled your gaita, you have searched and searched and searched, thus God has graced you with umatzasa. God helped you find what you were looking for. That was it. She saw the answer, and she said, and I realized that what the Rebbe was saying is, all your years and everything you were involved in was simply your yagaita as a prelude to your umatzasa. It was a search, a genuine search that was rewarded with what you discovered. And suddenly all her years were transformed from looking at herself as a pagan idol worshiper, alienated from the Jewish people. He said, no, this was all part of your genuine search to God, and hence, this is what brought you to where you are today. Don't amputate it. Don't dismiss it. Don't even be ashamed of it. Know what it is, but realize that this was inevitable to your journey of discovery. How could have you become who you are today if you wouldn't have gone on a search which from your perspective was the only way for you to find truth? She said 10 stones were removed from my chest. And as she shared with me the story, I thought to myself, wow. We've all made mistakes in life. At least I can talk about myself. We go on journeys. We look at things we did as parents to our children, to ourselves, grandchildren, friends. Whoever didn't make a mistake in life, please raise your hand. Okay, you don't have to all raise your hand simultaneously. But probably 1 or 2 or 3 have made mistakes like yours truly. And it comes a time and you could look in the mirror and say, I'm bad. But I think what this teaches us is take a look in the mirror and say, I really did the best I can with the tools I had. Can you forgive yourself? Can you say, I tried. I thought this was the way to go. And now all my mistakes become a catalyst and a springboard for discovery, for renewal. So instead of bashing ourselves, the Rebbe taught That's also part of your infinity. Forgive it. Embrace it. See it as the beginning of a new chapter. See it as the genesis of recovery. See it as the springboard for transformation. And then what happens? What happens is that when you look at Egypt today, you don't have to see it again. You don't have to look at it again. If I could look at it and I could see it with compassion, but I could see it. I could stare it in the eyes. I don't have to do it again. I want to conclude, my dearest friends, with a little story. I shared the story Friday night at Chabad of East Boca. And I just feel it's appropriate to share. I don't know why, but it came in. I want to share it with you and conclude with this. Somehow the subject tonight was Pesach, and I don't know why. I guess subconsciously I'm thinking about Pesach probably. But soon Pesach is coming, and I don't mean to stress you out. It's the holiday of liberation, so I'm sure when you hear Pesach, it just triggers the sense of inner emancipation, liberty, and sleeping during the Afikoman. The Lubavitcher Rebbe had a custom that the night of Pesach, after Ma'ariv, he would distribute matzah to the people who worked in his house and helped his wife. They cleaned, they cooked, they arranged things. Those who helped his brother-in-law and sister-in-law in their house, he's known as Rabbi Garari. His secretariat, the people who worked in his office, sending letters, taking care of the office. Around 10 or 15 people. My father was one of the people who would get matzah. So as a child, I would go with him. It was a very small group. And the Rebbe would go into his room and open the door. And he would give everybody, the adults, he would give a whole matzah and maybe a little piece. My father, he always gave a second whole matzah for the newspaper because he had his Yiddish newspaper, the Allgemeine Journal. And the few children that were there weren't many, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 children, he would always give a broken piece of matzah because the minors got not a whole matzah, but a prusa, a piece of a matzah. And it was never a problem for the Rebbe to find broken matzahs, because if you ever buy matzahs from a matzah bakery, you know the challenge is to find a whole matzah, not to find a broken piece of matzah. In fact, sometimes you have to work really hard to find a whole matzah. Anyway, I still remember it was my turn. I was standing there and I came to the door of his room, his private office, and he was standing. His face looked like Mamash Malach Elakim, was radiating with the joy of Pesach, of liberation and holiness. It was a very special, intimate moment because the Rebbe's holiness was extremely palpable. Unless you were Mamash, even if you were dead, you felt it. It was very, his Kedusha was very palpable. His holiness, you could feel it. You didn't have to be a mystic or a very sacred person yourself. And he looked down to take a broken piece of matzah and give it to me. But as he looked at it was a big brown 2 pounds of matzah, it was a whole matzah. So he lifted it up, and I understood he was intending to find the broken piece right under it. But it was also whole. So he picked up 2 of them to get the third one. It was also whole. And he started to go matzah by matzah. And I don't know how in the world that happened, but every matzah in that pound or 2 pounds was whole. And he literally went. I remember I was standing there. It seemed like eternity. He went down matzah to matzah to matzah. He couldn't find a broken piece of matzah. He got all the way to the bottom. Now what am I thinking? I'm thinking, you won't tell, I won't tell. Just give me a whole matzah. Nothing is going to happen. Nothing is going to happen. I'll hide it. I won't tell anybody. I promise you. Right? I was so excited. I thought, what is Rebbe going to do? Just give the kid a matzah next. Just one matzah. What am I asking already? Instead, I didn't say it. I was just thinking it. Instead, the Rebbe took both of his hands and he picked up this whole big pile of matzah and he turned it over like this, very skillfully. He went like this, turned it over very skillfully and gracefully to make sure that there was no broken matzah. And he went again down. But this time it was the other way. And again, there was no broken matzah. The first count was accurate. I could see, if I may say, that the Rebbe was reflecting, pondering what to do. And he started to step away into his room to retrieve another box of matzah and give me a broken matzah. But as I saw, as he took the first step, he changed his mind and he came back. And I saw that the Rebbe did not want to break a matzah. I could see that he didn't. That's why he was searching the whole time. He could have just broken it. And I can't tell you I know what the Rebbe was thinking, because I don't know what he was thinking, but it looked like he was debating whether to break or not to break or not to break. That is the question. And then he took a matzah and he broke it. He broke it. He broke it into two, and he gave me the piece. And he looked me in the eyes and he said, a kosherin or nafreilichin Pesach. You should have a kosher and happy Pesach. And I took my broken piece of matzah and I went home. The story happened when I was a little kid, and I forgot about the story. Many, many, many years passed. And not very long ago, I found myself in a situation and in a position where I was receiving, and I am receiving, hundreds of letters a day from people all over the world. And mostly stories of brokenness. Profound stories of brokenness. Of all forms and of all types of Jews, and sometimes even non-Jews. From Golders Green to Stamford Hill. From Bnei Brak to Meir Sha'aron. From Kiryas Sefer to Melbourne and Johannesburg and London and Lakewood and Borough Park and Williamsburg, and even the natural habitat of the Jewish people, Miami. And I was looking at one of these letters, and I fell apart, and I was asking myself, like Rivka, Lama za anochi? How did I get this job? And I was looking at this letter. I'm like, what am I even supposed to tell this person? What is anybody supposed to tell this person? And I don't know why, but God sent me a flashback. Sometimes when you have to remember something, you remember it. When you don't have to, you don't have to. And I remember that scene. And I wondered then, why did the Rebbe not give me a whole matzah? And then I realized the Rebbe wanted to empower me and share something with me. And what he was saying is, in his own inimitable way, don't be afraid of broken matzahs. Don't be afraid of broken souls. Don't be afraid of broken hearts. Don't be afraid of the brokenness inside of yourself. Instead, hold on to it. Embrace it. Make it part of your Seder. Internalize it, cherish it, value it, and look it in the eyes and give people that sense of a freilich and kosher and a freilich and Pesach, a sense of dignity and of joy. The greatest misservice you can do to yourself or others is to allow people to feel that their brokenness is deeper than their infinity, when really their brokenness is part of the journey of their infinity. So my dearest friends, that empowered me, I have to tell you, in a way that probably 100 therapy sessions couldn't have empowered me. Those are cheaper. So tonight, at this special Motzei Shabbos, as we commemorate the leadership of God's smile to the Jewish people after Auschwitz, it's not commemorating the leadership of a great Jew who was beloved and achieved a lot of great things. That too, but that's not really the point. The point is to commemorate not the greatness of the Rebbe, but the greatness that the Rebbe saw in you, and in you, and in you, and in me. To commemorate that greatness would be a real tribute to him, much more than to commemorate his greatness. To commemorate the greatness embedded in every soul, beginning with yourself and your loved ones, And tonight I want to share, if I can, a little piece of that matzah that I had the privilege of receiving from the holy hands of the Rebbe, to empower all of us not to be afraid of any form of brokenness, by knowing that when we could cry, we can also smile and sing and dance as Yasher Moshe. Not to be afraid by knowing that deeper than everything is the Elikus, the oneness, the truth, the song, the Einoid Movadai, the Netzach Yisrael, the eternity of Torah, of Hashem, and of love. That each of us can become an ambassador of that type of love that triumphs and gives people the safety and the empathy to be able to sing and dance again. As Yasher Moshe of Bnei Yisrael, as Rashi says, Moshe will sing. The song was not something of the past. The song is something of the present and of the future. May we experience speedily in our days. Amen. Thank you very, very much.
This class is brought to you by the yeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.